a lot of the barrier to entry to, let's call it the public spectrum of opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
is just fear-based, right? There's all the horror stories. So, we'll touch on that. I've got an example that I won't name names, but there's one that just made the news in Oregon that this person's going to prison and has $3 million to repay in damages. And I'm like, that's what we all hear about. Like, why you need good industry partners to not end up in prison.
Sure.
Yeah, and I know it's like it's a really crazy time to be in construction too. It's like you have all this public work going on. We have the one crazy thing. Like when I was doing some research, we have like this infrastructure report card. I posted on my LinkedIn about this, but it was like the 2025 infrastructure report card. Have you seen this, Jason?
I don't know that I have seen that one, no.
Okay. The most interesting thing about it, if I were to boil it down, is our infrastructure grade across the United States is a D plus at best. So that's all of our water lines, that's our bridges, that's our infrastructure, so on and so forth. So absolutely horrific, right? So really good opportunity to be in the space. But then too, you have all of these data centers popping up. And so all of us that are using AI on a day-to-day basis, we're looking to use more of it. What does that mean? We need to build more. Thing is, those are susceptible to prevailing wage rules. And so the money is there on infrastructure. The money is there on the CHIPS Act and building out these data centers and everything. And it kind of feels like the kind of gold rush for a lot of people. However, it comes with the big brother aspect of you got a lot of rules to play by. So Keith,
Yes.
yeah, go for it, Jason.
I'd say there's kind of when I look at kind of that fear factor that people have when they see things on the news, and you've got, a very small percentage where it comes from somebody that's, truly a bad actor. That's, taking
Mm-hmm.
advantage and trying to, steal from whomever or not play by the rules. Where I think it's really unfortunate is where you have people that are trying to do the right thing. They're not intentionally trying to cheat anybody and they want to do the right thing, but they don't have the resources, available to them to feel confident in
Mm-hmm.
doing things right. And they're afraid of getting in trouble by accident, when they weren't trying to take advantage of everyone. And those are the unfortunate circumstances where somebody gets in a bind when they weren't trying to, color outside the lines or anything. It's
Mm-hmm.
just they didn't have the resources or the knowledge available to them to do things correctly.
Mm-hmm. Keith, you've been in public work for a little while. Tell me about some of your first impressions.
So that I've always watched the numbers, right? Like you can, Freedom of Information Act, if you're in any commercial bidding spectrum, you get to see a lot of your competitors' numbers. And so for a long time, I was like, man, we can compete with those numbers. Those are things we could make some money on. And you look at the barrier of entry is so high, right? And it's not necessarily that there's a huge actual fence. There's just a mountain of paperwork. Like there's a literal 2-inch stack of a contract. And for people that don't know, most of the contracting in this world is still either done through some sort of a bid letting website that is horribly, horribly done with all these steps that if you don't do one right, it just says error and you have no idea where the error was. Or it's a mountain of paperwork that you're like, why is a $20,000 job got 2 inches of paperwork attached to it? And for years, when the economy was really good, we were just like, we're not interested in learning about how to do that. And as the economy shifted and as the ceiling has lowered on the private money and interest rates went up, we were kind of forced with our overhead burden to get into other areas of the industry. And that's where we started to enter. Actually, I have for bonding and things like that. We actually wrote a check, got a cashier's check, and turned it in with our first public bid, which is like unheard of because it says you can do cashier's check, cash, or a bond. And I was like, well, I don't know who we're turning the cashier's check into, but we just turned it in and it was for $70,000. And I was like, when do we get that back? Right? Because nobody's out there teaching this to people. Like usually you learn because you work for somebody else or you have a good friend or somebody in the industry that's like, hey, this is where you go. But it was really high. Like the barrier was really high and the cost to get in that, like it took us a long time to be able to have the money to be able to write a $70,000 check and then not know when it's coming back. Right. it was in August. It was a part of our cash flow season that we were really good. The backside was now we're like, hey, now we have all these certified payrolls and all these other hoops to jump through. And I'm like, I mean, we did certified payrolls back in the, in the putting America back to work thing in like 08, 09. Surely it can't be that hard. Well, back then it was all handwritten, right? There was the certified payrolls were different then. And as we've gotten into it, we have a full-time contract admin. Like that's all she does is she just works through those sets of the paperwork. And if you don't have the back end help, where do you go? What do you do? Right? Like we were determined not to go out of business. And that's where I have some questions. What does Beneco do? How do you help the guy that doesn't have the resources to have someone in house to do those things?
Yeah, great question, Keith. And that is, really in the construction industry, where there's not a lot of resources there on, some of the administrative work, or a lack of, people wearing multiple hats in, a business. They're doing a lot of things. There's oftentimes not somebody that, a lot of companies don't have somebody hired that can just focus on that, because it can be a full-time job, if you're getting into that type of work, for sure. So kind of a couple ways that, one we were talking a little bit earlier, just kind of some of the unknown or the fear that people have, is to provide some basic education, and, a place that they can go to answer some of their prevailing wage questions, with the certified payroll, some of the basic stuff that unfortunately is hard to find. So one, kind of a resource there for education, and making people feel comfortable with, what they're going to be doing is, within compliance, so that they kind of feel comfortable getting into it. And then, what we're able to do is, really on the prevailing wage Davis Bacon work, is on how they're utilizing that and the requirements for payments in the fringe dollars, how they can pay that to their employees, some of the different options, and then being able to streamline that, so they're not spending hours in Excel files, with those calculations, is really where we're providing the most, or providing a benefit to our clients and people that we work with.
So one thing that I kind of want to drill down into is, before we kind of get into the numbers and everything, for like folks that don't know about Beneco, or they're just breaking into public work, Jason, you guys have been at this exclusively for contractors for the last, 30, 35, going on 40 years and everything. How did you guys get into this? Like what made you guys focus on prevailing wage and public work? And just tell me a little bit more about the story, because I think it's unique, and I think it's really an advantage for a lot of folks to go after providers that have that specialty, that can speak the language. I think it's incredibly important versus getting somebody that has a blank stare when you bring up those two words, prevailing wage.
Yeah, it's a very unique, kind of niche industry market, but, if you're going to be into it, you really need to have somebody that understands it and specializes in it. I started with Beneco 12 years ago myself. I had never heard of prevailing wage or Davis Bacon. I had no idea what it was, the first day that I walked into the office, or when I went into my interview. And for most of the people that work for Beneco, it's the same story. Even people that have been in, finance industry, employee benefits, very few of them have come across this before. So it's niche, but there's a lot to it within that niche market. So, to your question, Beneco's been in business, I think, now for 40 years or close to it. Started off as a family-owned business, back 40 years ago, where the founding family, had some experience on the finance retirement side, um, and kind of realized that there was a gap, and none of your major name brand, employee benefits providers understood prevailing wage or specialized in it, because, if you're, large Fortune 500 company nationwide, there's a lot of businesses to go after. And how much time are you going to spend to understand this little prevailing wage market? So kind of carve that out as, an area to specialize in and to understand it, and to provide this to the construction industry where there's really, a gap there, and, kind of an underserved market, if you will, from understanding it, even then also from employee benefits standpoint in general. Uh, the construction industry historically has been an industry that's not up to the same numbers as other industries with offering employee benefits when it comes to 401k plans, health insurance. The industry as a whole is kind of lacking or underserved. And then you add in the prevailing wage piece, adds that complexity. So That's kind of how the business started 40 years ago. Kind of coming forward towards today, the family that started the company, that started Beneco, sold it about 13 or 14 years ago. And we're now we were acquired by Ascensus, is our parent company. They acquired us 6 years ago. And if you're in the retirement space, Ascensus is one of the larger record keepers of 401k plans in the country. So
Mm-hmm.
they acquired us for our expertise in this market to work with their clientele that does prevailing wage and allows us to focus on this kind of niche market.
Mm-hmm.
So if you said you provide education, that's like
Mhm.
one of the main
Yeah.
facilities that that you guys provide. Talk to me about the bridge between the misunderstanding from employee and employer, and how you guys unwind the misconceptions of prevailing wage. And I'm guessing, I haven't been in one of your seminars, but I'm guessing that the fringe benefits side is one of the bigger, darker, like, let's take a flashlight and a spotlight and put it on this. The wages aren't as complicated as the fringe,
Yep.
in my experience.
Definitely. Yeah. So, we do a lot of educational seminars around the country and webinars and events like that to bring that education in. So on these jobs, there's a required amount that you have to pay your employees. It's broken out in a base wage and a fringe benefit component. And there's kind of two different sides that we're looking at is one to the employer, to the company. They see this, usually higher wage than what they're used to paying that they have to pay their employees. And then you've got, from the employee side and, everybody talks, the workers talk and they kind of know what other people are making on different jobs and they see these high numbers and, they get really pumped about getting to do that type of work and bring home those higher wages. So that's really what the employees are seeing. I'm just thinking about like all this money there for the company. They're seeing, paperwork, compliance, and how do I figure in these higher wages into my bids and still make sure that I make money and follow the regulations for how this needs to be paid.
Yeah. So can you give a high level description of what fringe is?
Yes. So the fringe hours, it's a portion of that prevailing wage that the Department of Labor assess that you need to pay for work for a given trade in a given area. So it varies drastically by trade and by location where you're at, state to state, but even within county to county, the rates can vary significantly. And really, the way I like to explain that is it's a portion of the wage that has been set aside or kind of earmarked that's awarded to the contractor to be used to pay for benefits for the employees is how it was designed to be used. So it's a portion of their overall pay that what I have to say is that it was awarded to the business owner. You've been awarded this money when you won the job, but this chunk of it you have to pay your employees, and you've got some options for how you do it within a benefits package. So you've got options whether it's retirement, health and welfare, includes your health insurance, ancillary dental vision, vacation holiday pay, apprenticeship programs are generally the categories that the employer gets to decide, how that's being paid. Um, I think, Keith, you had said one of the things that could be hard to, or to put a flashlight on, or is hard for people to kind of wrap their mind around sometimes with that is how the fringe dollars are paid to your employees. You have to pay it to them, but the company gets to decide how within the framework of the regulations. So you can't say you're using that to pay for your employee's cell phone or, tools, equipment, stuff like that, which, we see from time to time. So you have to follow the regulations, retirement, health, vacation, apprenticeship. But it's not up to the employees really how that money is paid to them. The company gets to make that decision for how they're going to pay those dollars to the employees.
And so this is one thing that we've discovered over the last couple of years. Like, if you were doing an occasional prevailing wage job or two a year, it's not a big deal. From an employer and an employee standpoint, the value of, um, well, let's be blunt. Construction guys are not great financial planners, right? At the employee level and a lot of the employers level also. And so you get in these situations where you're paying, it's going to vary all over the country. I've seen it from $12 to nearly $20 an hour for fringe. Well, if you're able to put that in what we should be doing, funding the health and welfare, funding the vacation and PTO, and then like forcing these guys to stick it where it should be, which is in their retirement, to like, so that they have something in 30 or 40 years. What does that do? What I've seen it do, if you don't do it well, and we just ran the numbers last year, like we paid workers' comp and tax on paying the Fringe in cash, and it was 6 figures. The bill for those two things, because we're now 50% of our revenue comes from public work. Well, now those numbers are so big that we look at it and I'm like, why are these guys only having $2,000 a year in retirement put in? They're putting $1 an hour in. We need to do something different, because $2,000 a year doesn't get these guys at the level of income they're making, getting used to making through their whole working life. They're going to be millions short on the back end. And so what are the options that you guys provide for the employer to help do the right thing? I think that's the piece that is really hard to explain. Like when the employer gets to dictate where these things go or have some say. I had somebody say, well, you guys took that money from me. And I'm like, no, we definitely didn't take that money from you. It's in your account. But how do you explain that to people in a way that's not like you stole from me?
Yeah, definitely. Because that is the reaction. We hear that quite often, if you will. So there's kind of, again, two pieces, and I want to touch a little bit with kind of what you said there, Heath, related. So starting, we look at kind of two conversations, one for the employer, company, and then another for the employee, for the participants. And at the employer level, you mentioned, Heath, was your workers' comp rates and your payroll taxes. So of this prevailing wage money that you're paying your employees, whatever goes on their paycheck, as what's referred to as cash wages, is run through payroll. So you're increasing your company costs on your payroll taxes, your workers' comp, your general liability premiums based off of payroll. So there's kind of that savings level to the company for taking any of that prevailing wage money can be removed from payroll and put into benefits. And it has a huge impact on the bottom line to the business when your payroll cost. Easily 6 figures for most people that we're working with, some, upwards of $1 million a year in savings, depending on the size of the company. So that's a big piece to the company, and giving you bidding power and allowing you to win more of this work is another thing that we see quite often, where somebody starts off maybe doing 25, 30% prevailing wage work throughout the course of the year. They're paying all the fringe dollars as cash wages. They flip to using that for benefits, and that allows them to be more competitive in the market. They start winning more, and then that percentage increases. So it becomes, kind of the snowball effect there, if you will, where they start doing more of that work. So from a company standpoint, that's all positive and really good for the bottom line. When it comes to the conversation for the employees, it's a lot of education. And again, that we provide, going back to education at the company level, but also for the participants, on that they need that money for retirement. They need to have it saved. One thing I like to, explain when I do these events is that if I don't save enough for retirement, and hopefully I'm healthy enough that I could continue working past retirement age, but I travel around, I do seminars, I work from home on my computer. I could do this past the age of 65 if I had to, hopefully health wise. Realistically, that's a lot harder for workers in the construction space. Like, are you expecting somebody in their upper 60s to continue being a roofer, climbing on a roof and doing physical manual work? That it's even more important for somebody that's doing this type of work to be prepared for retirement than somebody that works in an office, where if you had to work a few years extra, probably easier to do than the type of work that they're doing. So, it is really important for them. And where we kind of see, with probably our best clients that we work with, we go through all the savings. You mentioned, Keith, they're going to save $200,000 a year in labor cost and cost of benefits. But what really is driving them to make these decisions is, I'm doing this because I know it's in the best interest of my employees. They may not do it on their own, but I know this is what's best for them, and they're going to thank me down the road. And we get some pushback initially, but when we go back and we visit our clients a year, 2, 3 years later, the employees are really happy with what's happening. They've got, several thousands of dollars in their retirement plan that they've never had before.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's the hard part. Like, I'm a numbers guy. Like, everything in my head, events, current events, and things that I see in real life. Like, I convert into a spreadsheet in my mind. And I'm like, well, that just cost us $18. Like that's the way my mind, that's the way God made my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Other people don't work like that. And I've, we've got one of our mechanics who's like the biggest advocate for retirement. And the reason he is, he explains to these guys like, look, you have a free 3% retirement match. Free. So that means if you make $30 an hour, you get $1 an hour raise by just taking money and putting it in your retirement. And then he goes through, and he's in his 50s, and he goes through and runs the calculation on one of those just free things on the internet. He goes, look at what you make at $1 an hour, an extra $1 an hour. That's $2 an hour going in your retirement. If you work 35 years, you're going to have $3.5 million. And he loves getting the kids in, because the kids are like, I don't want to give $1 an hour to something I don't get anything for. And he's like, well, wait a second. I'm 52 years old, and let me tell you the problem with your logic, right? Let me show you that I have 200,000 in my account, and like the 4% rule, this like the financial rules that we stopped, that a lot of people don't talk about, right? They like, if you're going into construction, there's a higher than average likelihood that you're not highly educated, right? That you've made you've had some bumpy decisions and a bumpy road getting here. And so financial literacy is so low in our industry that having people and partners like Beneco come in and teach, man, this is so important. Breck, I really need you to put the 3% in. You really should be putting more, but at very minimum, let's do this. The peace of mind that it provides after the initial shock is invaluable. And I think that, having an industry partner, if I was to deliver that information and it wasn't a third party, people would think something different. And the value that I see in having somebody like you guys come in and have that conversation is very similar to when you as a parent have been explaining something to your child for years, and then some random stranger says the exact same thing and they're a genius.
Jason,
right? That's
on day one, like when they show up and they're like, what's the biggest thing that these contractors are saying when they come to you, Jason, and you guys at Beneco? Is it, hey, we're struggling on cash Fringe, we're getting into more public work, or is there something else that's going on internally with the business of why they're restructuring their Fringe in the first place? Like, what does their day-to-day look like?
Yeah. A lot of times it's, well, they're doing something with the Fringe, but they don't know what else they can be doing. And they're looking for a better way to do it, or kind of some other things that we're seeing compared to when I started 12 years ago. Most people were paying the entire Fringe out as cash wages that I spoke to. They didn't know that they could be doing this. Now people are taking somewhat of a credit, a couple dollars, but what they don't realize is that they can put the entire Fringe amount into the retirement plan, for example. And where those numbers really add up, Keith, is that for a lot of our clients, they're putting $15, $20 an hour into the retirement plan from this Fringe. It doesn't have to be limited to those smaller amounts. People are nervous about doing that, and they want to know that they're doing it in a compliant way. It really is where that kind of, where those concerns or questions that they're wanting to know. Like, I know we're doing something with our prevailing wage. We know somebody down the street is doing more, but we don't know how or what we need to do to be able to do that. So that's really what they're coming looking for assistance on, in most cases.
Yeah, I think it's scary too. I know that in contracting is one of those weird industries where you might be friends with somebody out of state and be able to have a conversation with them, but you can't have the conversation with the competitor that's 2 doors down, right? There's this stigma that it's if I win, you lose sort of a scenario. And I think one of the big benefits to the world getting smaller through social media and through information is that these opportunities and options have become something that are, floating to the top. Because I've seen, like, we've paid it out in cash, and I will tell you straight up, when the guys come and show up in their brand new pickups that I know they're going to struggle paying a payment through the winter, I cringe and I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a conversation like 6 months from now about how they can't pay their bills. Right? A new truck payment's how much now? Way over $1,000. Yeah, like it just is. So, what about compliance on the employer side? I know. So when I still remember this because I've got like whiplash. I looked at my first prevailing wage book. And I was like, how do you make sense of this? It's a full on 1 inch. And then there's supplemental pieces that go with it. So you got your definitions book in Oregon, and then you've got your rates and the different jobs and the different zones. And my head was spinning. I'm like, how do you know that you're doing this right? How do you step in and help employers check those boxes to make sure they're compliant?
Yeah. What we're able to do for them is, I guess probably where it starts is make sure the programs that they're using are following the rules and regulations. And what's kind of hard with that is that the prevailing wage handbook or rule book, and they vary by state. You mentioned Oregon, that primarily they're the same, but there's some variances. They're not written the same as like your ERISA regulations for 401k plans or your regulations for benefits. So you're kind of interpreting from one to another. It's not written in plain language for the two. So it's being able to decipher that and put it in layman's terms. And again, kind of making people feel at ease that, what they're putting their money into for their employees, is set up to follow those regulations. On the benefit side, that's kind of where it is, with kind of bigger picture, compliance related to prevailing wage. Again, it's being able to provide that or go through those books with them and kind of, do you need to be registered in the state that you are to be able to do prevailing wage to bid on it? That varies state to state. What are some of the other requirements when it comes to certified payroll reporting? And those are things we give some high level guidelines to. We're not providing like consulting services on that, but really recommending that they're working with service providers that understand prevailing wage from A to Z. So there's the part that we do, but also telling them, like make sure you're working with somebody in the payroll side that understands prevailing wage. Somebody, whether it's your you know, financial advisor, broker, your CPA, you know, ask them if they understand prevailing wage so you can get some good guidance from them. And if they don't, maybe it's time to look for somebody that does if that's going to be a big part of your business.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's
those.
why we're excited to partner with you guys too, Jason over at Beneco, because like how we think about things is over here at Hammer. I mean, prevailing wage is native in our payroll system. Certified payroll is native. Time tracking is native. Everything from automating the fringe benefit calculation so it doesn't turn into that spreadsheet hell. That's a lot of the reason why people are just choosing to do everything out in cash friends because one, they don't know what's compliant or what they can use as leverage, but two, it's just the administrative work around analyzing all those benefits per hour per worker where they just say, screw it, we're just going to pay everything out in cash friend because we don't have the administrative firepower to do this stuff. And so that's why I'm really excited about you guys, especially too around the educational portion. Because I mean, we've done some webinars together, Jason, and it's a lot of people will say, "Well, I don't know who to ask. Like, I don't want to go ask DOL or DRR or labor relations because I just feel like that's going to trigger an audit. Because if I ask the wrong question, they're going to say, should we be looking into XYZ contractor?"
Mhm.
Versus showing up to a webinar, seminar, whatever it is, and be like, "Hey, I have some serious questions. I hope I'm being compliant. I want some guidance here so that we can do things correctly by our employees without it triggering this fear of, a nice healthy slap on the wrist or even worse of all the headlines that we read."
Yeah, and then even if you do reach out to the Department of Labor in different states, even getting good information from them is not easy. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
from people that we've spoken to, it's hard to get. Nobody wants to clarify anything or have it written to really give definitive answers, or it's more interpretation. So it's hard. It is really hard to get advice on that stuff from anywhere. And yeah, nobody wants to voluntarily bring the Department of Labor into their business. So
Yeah. What would you say? We've heard this a couple times, but like a contractor will say, "Hey, we want to get this 401k or trust set up, and we also want employees to be able to extract that money whenever they want." Like, what are your thoughts around that? Because I think that's also kind of like a short sighted comment too, where is that really benefiting the employee? Also, you're susceptible to taxes and everything. So, what's your response? Like, if I was a contractor asking you that, showing up, Jason, saying, "This is what we're thinking about doing. This is what our employees really want to do. Guide me how I should be thinking about these things, and if that's a correct way of thinking, or if you would reframe it for the contractor."
Yeah, and some of those get into kind of gray areas or interpretations around the regulations and what you technically can do or are not able to do. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, Mark, where you've mentioned, is what we're doing best for our employees. And that's, as a fiduciary to your plans, for us as a provider and then also for the plan sponsor, is if there ever is an audit, that's one of the questions that they're going to ask is, how does this benefit your employees? Is this set up in the benefit of your employees? That's what so many of these regulations, when you're talking specifically benefits, IRS, ERISA on the 401k side, does this plan, is it benefiting your employees or is it just benefiting ownership or the company? And you need to be able to answer that. So again, while your employees might initially want some of that money if you ask them, or would like the ability to kind of cash out or have immediate access to the funds in their account, is it really in their best long-term interest, and who's paying for that? So it most depends on how it's structured and the types of plans. In most cases, if employees are able to cash money out that way, they're paying penalties to the IRS, 10% early withdrawal penalties. They're paying, the taxes on that and transactional cost. That's eating away a lot of that money that they would have gotten if you just paid it to them as cash wages on their paycheck. So from the employer side, why are they not just doing that? It's like, well, we don't want to pay it to them on the paycheck because then we're incurring all that extra labor cost and the payroll taxes and workers' comp. So we're putting it over here instead. So we save that money. Like, okay, that's good for you, the business, but then what about your employees? Like, oh, well, they want the money. They didn't want it in there anyway. So they're cashing it out and they're paying penalties and transactional fees, and they're getting 55 to 60 cents on the dollar. Well, who's really benefiting in that setup? The employee's getting a fraction of what they should be getting. The company's saving a bunch of money. But I think it's hard to justify that that's really in the best interest of the employees versus having it in a long-term retirement plan. And, if you look at the IRS regulations for taking distributions from retirement plans, how they're generally set up is, usually you've got to reach retirement age, be disabled, death, or terminate employment is how that would be where you'd have access. Now you can do loans, which are allowed in retirement plans, and hardship distributions. But again, those need to be documented hardships where, there's proof of, medical expenses, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think the best interest in the employee is it's an interesting question. Like in this market today, people are going to take things personal, and you can't help as an employer, a benefits provider. I mean, any of us, we can't help the way that somebody views it, but you can do what's right and explain to them the consequence of short-sightedness and say, look, like we look at the money that's coming in Fringe. Like if you're getting prevailing wage, you're probably making more than your normal hourly wage first, right? You've already got a 5, 10, 15%, maybe 20% increase in your hourly compensation. We believe that it's our fiscal and fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you are prepared at the end of life. And having those conversations and having someone who's non-emotional to deliver that information it is important. And I think, there was the State of the Union yesterday, and it was interesting because President Trump was talking about the opportunity that, like younger people are having a hard time finding houses and buying houses. And he was, that politicians, right, wrong, or indifferent, are looking at options to try to give opportunities to people. And I looked at I heard him say this and I thought it was a pretty decent idea. Like, you haven't been able to access your retirement funds to put down payments on houses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the few places in life that have traditionally not gone backwards, except for a few moments in time, has been the housing sector. And we are careful to not put too much money into retirement because we need to live. And I think if the politicians start offering some of these other pieces, it's easier to sell financial literacy to guys who don't have much of it, to an industry that typically has a black eye and a bad reputation with being responsible in the first place. That's really the thing that I look at this and I shake my head and I'm like, I understand why these things came out 50 or 100 years ago, because there were people that were and there was no social media. The newspaper was the main form of news that got across the country. And by the time somebody got figured out that they were getting hustled, they were the person who hustled them was taking the $10 million, leaving the country and never to be back. That's not happening today. But looking at what's best for people isn't always the easiest information to deliver. And I think that's where this instant gratification society has become really hard. We have an obligation to do what's right, but we have a responsibility to deliver it in a way that people understand. And that is even harder, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is. And yeah, if you can step back and look a little bit bigger picture in long term, in two ways. One, saving for retirement, which you need, but also, you had kind of alluded to it with their pay is significantly higher on prevailing wage than it is on non-prevailing wage or private work. And what we almost always see end up happening is you have, somebody starting this, they're doing a little bit of prevailing wage work. See these big swings in the employee's pay where they're going from $40 an hour to $70 an hour for a shorter amount of time throughout the course of the year. So really high highs and kind of lower lows. And by doing this and having the contractor be more competitive in this market, if they have a good process in place on the payroll, the benefits, kind of everything A to Z certified payroll, they become more competitive and they increase the amount of prevailing wage work they do throughout the course of the year. That it reduces the amount of time that they're making that $40 an hour private wage. And even if they're not going to get the 70, maybe we're going to put 15 of it into benefits and that number goes from 70 to 55. We can do that 55 for more hours throughout the course of the year and reduce the amount of hours where they're only making $40. So, it's a couple months of 40, then a whole bunch of 55 versus a lot of 40 and a couple months of 70.
Yeah.
That kind of, we mentioned numbers, visualizing the numbers.
Yeah.
We can increase the floor. We'll bring the ceiling down on their pay, maybe in their paycheck, not their compensation. They're getting it in retirement. The ceiling might be a little bit lower, but we can raise the floor through what they make throughout the course of the year. And in a couple years' time, suddenly the employees, oftentimes, they're getting $20,000 a year in their retirement plan, and their take-home pay is the same as what it was because the contractor increased their prevailing wage work, and they're not having to do as much of that lower-paying private work.
Yeah, I think it's a good perspective to have because when you take 70, I mean, this is a high level. As I understand it, it's like 15 or 20% above, if just very round layman's terms. If you've got a $70 an hour labor burden, your actual cost is 20% higher than that by the time you do the matching taxes and workers' comp and all this other stuff that's figured in. And if you can bring that down to a more manageable number, a more palatable number where you can be more competitive, the team goes farther. Individually at the beginning, it probably feels shorter, but having that longer term vision is hard because construction, as both of you guys are aware, because most of your work comes with contractors, it's like crisis to crisis. It's just crisis management 101. Like, let's just put today's fire out and we'll worry about tomorrow's fire when it pops up. And I think that's the piece that having good, strong industry partners can help with. Saying, hey, Breck, can you help us with, and like, as an example, I'm pitching both of the ideas of what you guys do. Geofencing around our prevailing wage projects is going to help us minimize the overpayment of wages we shouldn't be paying on those projects. So like a guy writes his time card in and says, hey, here's when I'm out on the job site. Well, if we have breadcrumbs inside the job site, I'm like, well, there's like a 2-hour delta here between and it's not like you were just outside of it. You were 20 miles away. Help me understand why we should be compensating you for this. It's made us, like, just the thought behind it has made us more competitive, right? Because now we're really looking at it from a dollars and cents and a nuts and bolts, and you can get really granular and you have backup for these things that if you get a prevailing wage audit, you get a BOLI audit in Oregon, all they do is just ask you for mountains of work. And then when they get it one way, they're like, hey, could you resend it in a different format? And today we're like, no, you have the information. You have all the information we have. If you want more, you can go back end, spreadsheet, I forget how you said it, Breck, but like
spreadsheet help.
Yeah, you can go drop into spreadsheet hell yourself and figure it out, but this is how we do it, and we have breadcrumbs that back it up. And so there's going to be a 5-minute delta one way or the other. And if you believe we owe the 5 minutes, we can have a different conversation. But it's going to go both ways. So on the site and off the site, we're up plus or minus 5 minutes. So we want credit for both. They should equal 0.
Jason, I'm curious, like if somebody's listening to this podcast right now and they're like, okay, we're paying things out in cash Fringe. It already sounds like I'm overinflated on our payroll taxes. We're not really taking credit for what we're already paying for. Like if you were to just think of averages where like a contractor listening to this could walk away and be like, okay, let me just start figuring out, like, I got 50 guys in the field today. 20-30% of our work is prevailing wage, maybe a little bit lower. I want to know how much I can actually save if I were to go with something like Hammer or Beneco to start figuring out like how much I could actually save per hour. How would you break that down for them simply?
Yeah, what I would do, if they might want to get to an estimate on their own is, what is the fringe rate that you're paying out as cash wages, that hourly rate? So in some parts of the country, it's, $5 to $10, in states in the Northeast, it's over 30 in some places. So that can vary drastically. But let's say the fringe amount you're paying is cash, let's say it's $10 an hour. Okay. You have the option, you can use that entire $10 for benefits, whatever benefits you want. The health side, there's some calculations there, but the entire 10 can be used in retirement or other places. So that $10 is going to be taken off of payroll. I would say as a good average is 25% is what we refer to as your labor burden rate. It's your payroll taxes, FICA, federal, state, and employment taxes. That ends up close to 10%. Then your workers' comp and general liability. So whatever percentage that ends up being gives you your labor burden rate as a percentage. So if that's 25%, which is pretty common, 25 cents on the dollar, if your fringe rate is $10 an hour, 10% of that, $2.50 is what you'll save for every hour worked, for every
hour worked. So then what you could do is back into that equation and say, if we're doing 10 or 15% of our work, let's look at that at a total of 2080 hours for the entire year. How many of our guys are actually performing that work? So let's just say 10, 15%. And then you have your kind of round number there where it's like, these are the total amount of hours. Now let's times that by that dollar amount, that $2.50 there. And then that's where you get your total, what it's actually costing you.
Yeah.
Versus what you could save. So now, Keith, like the first thing that you had mentioned on the podcast is like when we first did this in Cash Fringe, we were paying well over 6 figures. This is exactly how we've kind of come full circle on that simple equation. We'll show you exactly what you're losing and draining on payroll taxes.
Yeah, we're paying it out in cash, and it's being short-sighted because what its intention is, the money's actually intended to make the employee's life better.
Yeah.
Giving them cash today, I would argue 99.9% of the time doesn't make their life better. It just doesn't. Long term, that money should be sitting in a retirement account because we don't do it enough, right? That it's set aside, it's special earmarked money for something. And if we have say over it, we should do the responsible thing and push it into a place that's going to benefit them way more, because compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. It's one of my favorite things that Warren Buffett ever said. He goes, compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. It's a magical thing. And if people are short-sighted and they're like, well, what about today? You'll never understand compound interest if you're always worried about today. And as an employer, we have a responsibility to try to bridge that gap. And I think that's what Beneco does, is you try to bridge the gap from a savings and a fiduciary side and say, there are benefits to this, and I know you're not going to like it up front, but long term, your life is going to be way better if you listen.
One of my favorite stories related to that, we had a client that had been with us for well over 20 years, and one of their long-term employees retired and actually invited our CEO to the retirement party. And he did his little speech. He had been in the company for a couple of decades. And he mentioned that, he had over $2 million saved for retirement. And he said, to everybody, and he was pointing at the younger guys in the audience, he's like, I would not have this today if my employer did not have the foresight to put all this prevailing wage money in my retirement plan. And, Beneco, I said our CEO was there at the party. Thank you to you guys. Really, it was the business owner. Like we were there we provided the plan, but the business owner made the decision
Mm.
And he pointed to the younger guys. He's like, "This is why I tell you don't complain about this. Like, it's good for you. Like, I'm off to go get a boat, enjoy life, retire at a good age with
As we
a couple
should.
$1,000, and like that's what it can do for you." So I know all results may vary, type of thing, but
Yeah.
those are the stories that are great to hear, and shows that it pays off.
Well, I think there's like a whole perspective shift here, Jason, and Keith. You'll probably touch on this a little bit too. But like, if I were to summarize everything that we're kind of learning on what we're chatting about right now, is I think a lot of people think that Fringe is just compliance. We got to pay this. This is just a rule that Big Brother requires of us to stay compliant. What you're actually talking about is Fringe's leverage, not just compliance. And I think that is a completely different way to think about this, especially folks operating in prevailing wage or doing more of it. You don't have to get your butt handed to you if you're operating in this space. And I think Keith probably has some more stories here, but I think like if I were to boil public work down into like three things, that's one, you got to get your estimates correct. And I think Keith can probably allude to this, but like if you have inflated margins or you're paying more on the tax burden and everything and the labor burden, like your estimates are going to be higher. And on public work, I think all of us know this. It doesn't go to highest bidder. So one, you already kind of lost out on the front end. Two is if your fringe structure isn't optimized, naturally you're just going to be burning more oil in the organization that doesn't benefit you as an employer for what you're already paying for or your employees. And then the third one to hit it is the administrative overload where okay, now you have these things in order. Well, now you got to report on it. And so, do you have the structure in place to one punch above your weight class, but do it compliantly? Like, I think that's the one thing that I'm really excited for you guys to chat here, Jason and Keith, is uh, Keith and KNL, they operate well above their weight class, and I think that's the one thing of why I love working with them is naturally from the outside you might think they have well over 100 and something employees there. I don't know what you're at, Keith, today, 50, 60, close to
50.
70, and there's no plans of stopping, but you guys run thousands of jobs a year and it's because you've gotten the estimates correct, the administrative things ironed out, and you're actually structuring things and also educating your people. Like you guys do a really, really good job about educating your people for the future, not just what they need tomorrow
Yeah.
or what they
Yeah.
need today.
To speak into that a little bit. So I've looked back, like go back 5 years and start looking into some of the bids that we turned in 5 years ago and then doing job cost analyses on them. Cause like, they were basic spreadsheets or they were on a whiteboard or, you're learning and you're trying to figure out what works for you. And so you've got variables and our labor rates and what we figured our per day, per shift, per hour burden were for our employees. Um, like we thought we were going to get an 18, 20, 25, maybe depending on what it was, maybe there's a 30 or 40% margin. And we were so wrong. Like we were lucky we got some of the work we did because we made a ton of money and it was mostly because I made mistakes. Like we calculated and it was on the spreadsheet and I could have passed a polygraph telling you what I thought it was going to cost. But the reality was we were so far off. And we happen to do, because we bolt on multiple service items, we can get a little more margin and we have more room because we call it 4 or 5 tracks of income inside of our organization. So like we pave, we mill, we excavate, we stripe, we do traffic control, like we do all these different things. And because of those things, we can be a little more profitable than a company that subbed those things out. If we didn't sub those things out, we would have never had any business getting this work. So when the economy constricts, and I'm not sure if anybody's aware of this, but it's pretty tight right now. Like the economy is very constricted and it's very, very, very tight. When things are this tight, if you have that fluff and that delta in the margin, you likely miss more times than you make the shots. Like they don't give rebid opportunities. And that's been where we've gone and we've watched our close rate and the jobs that we really want start to increase. And we've become an industry disruptor because I believe the difference is that we understand our hard costs better than our competitors. That's the like if people say, what's the superpower? Thought. Knowing, like getting down in the nitty gritty, saying it's not $12 an hour. It's $12.21 an hour. And if we're 16 miles away, that goes up 11 cents. And like getting down all the way down into, and if you don't know what your burden is and you're spending you said there was an example of somebody saving $1 million. It is so hard to make $1 million today. Right. And if you can save that and you can somehow, and you can get the employees to buy into the long-term vision, everybody goes farther. There's that African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That's business. If you can get people to buy into the vision of the organization and the leadership, that's where you're headed. And I think that's the difference. Like, that's why we started winning more. It's why we become more competitive. It's actually why some of our industry, like, their ancillary people in the industry have said, we're not working with you anymore because you're no longer just somebody we would work with sometimes. You're actually competing on the work that we used to win on a regular basis. And now you're taking those jobs. So we need to draw a boundary. Like, we're actual competitors now. We're not two people in the same industry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, there's no greater compliment than that. I'm like, I appreciate that. At least you're straight up to tell me. Other people block my number and I don't know what happened, But I believe that's one of the things, like, the competitive advantage when things get tight is when you know your numbers. And if you have a good industry partner where you can say, hey, let's take the benefit package, let's divide it by our payroll, and let's figure out what our actual per hour rate is, it's huge. It's huge.
So, Jason, the last thing that I want you to touch on is, like, all of this sounds gravy, right? You got lower payroll taxes, it's benefiting the employees, you're getting a hell of a lot more competitive on public work. What does that even look like getting set up? Like, how should we even think about this? It sounds so gravy, it could be a mountain of work for us. So I want you to walk through that.
Yeah. First thing is, for us, myself or somebody from my team to have a conversation with kind of what you're doing today, and your goals and your objectives, where could we help you out? Kind of fill in some gaps if there are any. And, there's a lot of little things that people miss sometimes, with how they're currently structuring their fringe calculations or what they're putting where for benefits. Just kind of let us do like an audit of that, kind of take a picture of how are you doing things currently. Let's make sure you're doing it correct and you're not, making some mistakes on accident where, just reporting something differently or having it in the wrong column that can cause you compliance issues. So we'll kind of do that, take a snapshot of where you currently are, give you the options. And again, I would say you can use that full prevailing wage piece for benefits. Maybe we don't want to right away. Maybe we do. Maybe we want to do this or not that. Is I kind of like see what fits for you. And then we can kind of provide a proposed solution for you, an example of what this could look like, how it's going to impact you, how it's going to impact your employees. Long term, whether you're doing a lot of prevailing wage or a little, it changes the numbers a lot. So we would do that with you. And then, from there we can look at, what we really do at Beneco is we design, administer, and record keep employee benefits for prevailing wage. So we kind of go through those exercises with you. And then if it makes sense, then we can get into looking at, what we could provide you with those benefits and how we do it.
This is why we partner with you guys, Jason.
And then we call Breck and he helps you out with, on the payroll side to make sure everything runs smoothly there too.
We're just the boring payroll and prevailing wage guys, Jason. That's all we do.
We're exciting to a small, like I said, it's a small niche, but to that niche, I think they get pretty excited about what we do. It's for, much boring, but we get some pretty large audiences. We did a webinar this week that had almost 70 people on to learn about prevailing wage, located up in the Midwest. So, there's people excited for it. They need help. So we're here to do that and happy to be a resource.
And the opportunity is there. There's a lot of money in the space and it's a great way to diversify. And if you want to take advantage of public work, then you got players to help you do it. One question before we hop off, Jason. I think this is also a perfect question to, given that we're talking about a lot about retirement and employee benefits and everything. So our podcast, Bread to Build, what does that phrase mean to you? What does bread to build mean to you?
Oh boy. I'm supposed to be prepped for this coming into the podcast. I should have thought of that one. I think
there's no wrong answer.
No wrong answer. I think I'd look at that as more of a mindset. Is just kind of how you approach everything on a day-to-day basis. Is that individually, You can always be building and growing and learning more, whether it's individual level, your team, your company, you know, our country, anything, is this kind of a mindset that we can always grow, build, and improve. That's where I'd go with it.
Money. That's exactly how we think about it.
Perfect.
Well, Jason, it was really awesome having you on the podcast. I hope this was a good insight into public work. It doesn't have to be as terrifying as it seems to be. And I think Keith brought a lot of perspective too, as he's grown a lot of their public work from 0% now to nearly half their revenue. So it's a testament that you can punch above your weight class, do it compliantly, and also keep running after the jobs.